Welcome to part 1 of the entire plot of Heir of Fire from Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series. Today we're going to be covering chapters 1 through chapter 18. And if you're just dying for a plot roundup of every single book in the series, you should definitely subscribe and follow along. Chapter 1, we start with Celaena just lounging on the rooftops in Wendelin. And we also find out she's been here for 2 weeks now. She basically got to Wendelin, looked at the castle, looked at all the guards and security, and she was like, you know what? Not my circus, not my monkeys. I'm not doing this job. And she doesn't really care about the consequences anymore because she is spiraling from Nehemia's death and everything that encompasses that grief. She's basically just living on the rooftops, and every single day she steals water, food, and lots of wine. The only thing she really cares about at this point is finding the word keys, because she did make a blood oath to Nehemia at the end of Crown of Midnight where she said, I will free the people of Eelway. And in order to do that, she needs to stop the king, and the only thing she can do to stop the king is beat him to the other word keys and destroy them. And conveniently for her, she is very close to Dornael, and the queen of Dornael is Mauve. And Mauve would know a lot about the word keys. We also get a little bit of insight as to how Celaena is handling her grief. Every single night when the sun goes down, she gets off of the rooftops and she basically goes to these like fighting pits. And at the very beginning of the night, she'll bet her amethyst ring that she got from Chaol, intentionally lose it, and then basically spend the rest of the night trying to win it back. And that's just like what she's been doing for the past 2 weeks. Chapter 2. So one of these nights, she's walking down an alley, probably looking for some food or water, and she sees a Fae male at the end of the alley walking in her direction. And she can tell off the bat this man is Fae. First of all, because just the way he carries himself, and second of all, he does have tattoos all over his body in the Fae language. And she says that she knew who he was and why he was there, but then she reveals that he's one of Mauve's elite warriors and doesn't really give us a name. So I don't think she knew like who he was, but she had enough of the idea. She knew that he was there to take her to Dornael. And he basically says like, you've been summoned, let's go. And he takes her to 2 horses, and they hop on these horses and they're heading there. And she's analyzing him in her own Sherlocky kind of way. She's figuring out a good bit about him, but the only thing that's really stumped her is she can't guess what his animal form is. Fun fact, and something that you will learn basically throughout the series, so I'll just give you a jump start right now and it will make things a lot less complicated for you. But every single Fae has an animal form. They're basically like shape-shifting, but they can only shape-shift into one animal. So we don't know what his is, and we actually find out his name is Rowan as well, so this is Rowan. I don't feel like this is ever really outright said. They just kind of assume you understand this, because we learn that Celaena's a Fae, right? We find out that Celaena's animal form is a human, which I know for a lot of people that was really confusing of like, why can she go back and forth between human and Fae and most people can't do that? It's because human is her animal form, which to me is bonkers, but very convenient for her if you ask me. So yeah, she knows that hers is human, but she's like, what's this Rowan guy's animal form, you know? Chapter 3, we are going to jump to Chaol's POV. It starts off with him letting us know that he's been having nightmares, basically reliving the night that he watched Aelin, aka Celaena, brutally murder Archer. But instead of Archer, he's like imagining Dorian in Archer's place. So I feel like this is just really reflecting Chaol's paranoia that Celaena and Dorian were always meant to be enemies, or Aelin and Dorian were always supposed to be enemies. And then later in the day, I guess he's with Dorian and he decides to tell him like, hey, so I have to go back to Aniel with my father. Now, 3 things. This is news to Dorian. Dorian's very upset about it. But there's 3 main reasons why Chaol has to go back to Aniel with his father. Obviously, it was the cost to get Celaena sent away so no one would find out she's Aelin. 2, he doesn't want to be around now that he knows Dorian has magic because he realizes he's a liability to Dorian. And then 3, he doesn't want Dorian specifically to find out who Celaena is. So Dorian obviously knows that something is wrong and not quite right, but their conversation gets interrupted by the entrance of Adian Ashriver. So he comes into the dining hall, which I guess is where this conversation was taking place, and he is a character, to say the least. He is pure warrior, very clearly from Terrasen, and Chaol kind of has this moment where he's looking at him and he's like, how did we not see it? Like, he's very clearly related to Celaena. They're the same exact person. Like, they have the same eyes, the same look about them. Like, they're so unbelievably similar. And somehow no one picked up on the fact that she could be Aelin his cousin that went missing and everyone assumed was dead. Within seconds, Adian gets real sassy with the king. He has some gall. And the running joke, I guess, is that the king keeps him around because it's like entertaining or refreshing to have someone to give him some pushback. But Kale has like this split second where he's like, first of all, why would he put someone in Terrasen, whose kingdom he demolished, so high up in ranking in their like army? And then on top of that, why does the king allow him to be so sassy with him? And then in that moment, Kale sees that Adian has one of the black obsidian rings. So in other words, we find out that Adian is being mind controlled by the king. Something else that's cool to note is that he's in possession of the sword of Orinth. And that is actually an important sword for you to know. So let's commit that to memory, all right? There's Damaris, that's the sword from Gavin's grave, and then there's the sword of Orinth, which is actually a royal Terrasen family heirloom. So technically it's supposed to be Aelin's. The king took it as a prize whenever he conquered Terrasen, and he basically gave it to Adian as like a trophy for his loyalty, I guess, after he served him for so many years. And so Adian reports to the king whatever he's supposed to, and then he decides to pop a squat right next to wherever Dorian and Kale are. And they hate him. They really, really do. To fill in the gaps for you, they call him Aderlin's whore. So I'll let you fill in the gaps for yourself on that one. Then Adian starts asking them about the king's champion, saying he wants to meet her. Very fishy. Very suspicious. And Kale's like, well, thank goodness she's gone, because he would probably recognize her in a heartbeat, because he will actually learn a little bit more about this in a couple chapters. But basically, he would know her if he saw her. This could go one of two ways. One option is that he would identify her and then she would get killed basically on the spot. But then the other option is that he sides with her and then they become forces to be reckoned with, and then they decide to raise their own army and conquer Aderlin. Seems reasonable to me. And then Adian starts talking about this witch queen, aka Baba Yellowlegs, who we know that Selena killed. And basically he starts saying that, oh, it's very convenient, the timing of her death, almost as if she was actually murdered, which we know that she was. So that's a little awkward. And then Kale's like, yeah, that's so funny, LOL, I gotta go. And as he's leaving, Dorian's like, hey, I know you're hiding something from me. And Kale basically responds like, I am, but trust me, it's for the best. And that's it. Chapter 4, we have a brand new POV of a witch. Listen, the witch chapters in this book are really, really annoying, and they make no sense, and they feel like they serve no purpose, but I will challenge you to keep in mind how important these are for the future and just really, really pay close attention. And I swear, everyone I've talked to who've like read the books before and then they reread the books, they say like, I used to be so annoyed with the witch chapters, but then going back, like, I love them so much more now. Like, trust me, do not sleep on the witch chapters. Now, this witch's name is Manon Blackbeak. A lot of people say Manon. I say Manon. I feel like it's 50-50 split. Like, some people are like diehard Manons, some people are diehard Manons. So she's at a farm in a village and she's like raiding it basically. And her and all of her little witchling friends are just wrecking havoc and killing people left and right. In all reality, that is everything that happens in this chapter, but we do get a good bit of like witch politics, so bear with me. There's one faction particularly that we learn a lot about in this book, and then the other faction we learn about later. They're the Crochans or Crokins. I honestly, to this day, don't ask me to say that too many times. Those witches, these witches, they're further out in the series. Like, they'll be addressed here and there, but we're not going to learn a lot about them or their politics until a little bit later, so don't worry about that right now. But you do want to know about the Iron Teeth witches, and they all have iron teeth. So there's Blackbeaks, Blue Bloods, and Yellow Legs. If you ask me, 2 out of 3 of those are really epic, and one of them is a little bit silly. But that's just my opinion. I would not want to be a yellow leg witch. If I'm gonna be a witch, I better be a Blackbeak. Are you kidding me? Anyways, that's just my personal opinion. What I guess you do need to know is that all the Iron Teeth witches, they've basically made it their like mission and goal to like stomp out all the Crochan witches. So Manon is not just like your typical brutal witch. She's one of the most brutal witches in her faction, in the Blackbeaks. And she has a reputation for hunting down and killing Crochans. as is the assignment given to her by her grandmother. Back to the politics. Every witch faction has like their grandmother who serves as like queen basically of their faction. They're called the matrons. But in this case, the Blackbeak matron is legit her grandmother, like by blood. And then another thing you're probably wondering right now is, oh, it sounds like all the witches are women. Yes, all the witches are women. There's no such thing as a male witch. There's no like wizards. Like you're a witch or you're a dude. Like there's no dude witches. And witches can only have female offspring. Fun fact. Chapter 5, really short one. Selena and Rowan have passed through Wendelin and now they're in Dornael. And they've set up camp for the night. And Rowan is just being really unpleasant. And he's not like being like mean, but he's just straight up rude. Like he's not talking to her, he's ignoring her. And then if he ever does answer her, it's very short, quick, curt. He's not really like taking care of her or anything. And this is starting to make Selena a little nervous that this isn't exactly the warm welcome to see Queen Mauve that she was hoping it was going to be. And now she's a little afraid of what this interaction is going to look like. Chapter 6. This is where one of my favorite plot lines of the whole series comes in, but we're going to start in Dorian's POV. Because everything has changed for him, knowing that he could literally die if anyone finds out he has magic, and the one person who knew he had magic and said she would help him with it died, and then he told his other friend who wanted to be there for him, and then she got sent away, and then he accidentally revealed to his best friend, and now his best friend isn't talking to him. So basically, he is in the most scariest situation of his life, and all the people he's ever cared about have now abandoned him. And he's basically been disappearing to the tombs like every single night just to get away, just get some peace. And that's actually really important. Remember that. Dorian likes to linger in the tunnels now. That's like his thing. So he's like walking around the tunnels one night and he's basically been told that it's his job to entertain Adian Ashriver while he's in court. And we don't like this assignment because we don't like Adian. He's specifically supposed to entertain him, no exceptions, today from noon till nightfall. So noon comes and Adian wants to walk through the gardens with Dorian. And Dorian just, yeah. There's like this really childish thing that goes down. I honestly, like, I can't even relay it without cringing, but basically they get in a little bro fight and Adian decides to like push him and make it seem or look like an accident, and then Dorian ends up like falling back into a thorn bush and like catching himself on his hand, and like the thorns cut up his hand. I don't know. It's really cringy. But all you gotta know is, like, Adian does not like Dorian, but Adian is gutsy about it, like, legit. And now Dorian has, like, little cuts on his hand from rose thorns. Poor baby. Basically, nightfall happens, so he's like, see ya, Adian, I'm out of here. And he decides that the, like, thorn cuts from the roses are, like, kind of stinging his hand a little bit, so he's gonna go down to the infirmary and just get it healed. And he sees a healer, and she's one of the healers in the castle. She's not the head healer. She's in the hierarchy of healers, like she's towards the bottom, like she's basically learning under the head healer. And he asks her to heal the cut on his hand, and he's starting to realize it's a little embarrassing that he came for these tiny little cuts. And he's also realizing how beautiful this healer girl is. And then on top of that, he realizes like, oh wait, this was the healer who healed me, Selena, and Kale the night that we like tried to fight off that monster and we all had injuries. But she kind of picks up that he's buttering her up because he doesn't want her to tell anyone about that night. So she assures him like, don't worry, I haven't told anyone about like the night you guys came with all those like mysterious injuries. And then she introduces herself, and her name is Sorsha. Now we're gonna jump to Sorsha's POV because she's a little sad. She has healed him like a ton of times. So she was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm like invisible or something. Apparently every single time she's healed him, she's hoped that he would remember her. And he never does. So the fact that he did like kind of remember her makes her feel better, but at the same time, I'm a nobody to you. And then we get a little bit more of her backstory. She works under Amethy. Amethy is the head healer. And she's actually an immigrant from a village called Fenharo that was actually burnt down and completely destroyed by the king because that's where I guess a lot of healers lived. And basically is reflecting on healing the prince and being like, I don't know what it is about whenever he walks through a door and forgets who I am, but I wonder when he's gonna come back here again and if he's gonna have me reintroduce myself and he's gonna forget who I am all over again. And it's kind of sad because you can tell it really hurts her because she really wants him to remember her, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Chapter 7, back to Celaena's POV. Her and Rowan are finishing up their travels and they get to the gates of Dornael, which is the home of Mauve, aka, in case you don't remember, Mauve is Aelin's aunt. And Celaena walks into the room and Mauve pulls the whole, "Hello, Aelin Galathinius," which Celaena's like, that was like the words she was dreading because it was the first time like it's actually been said out loud. Chapter 8. Celaena's gut reaction is to say Aelin Galathinius is dead, which I mean, I get, like she hasn't been Aelin Galathinius in years, but she legit believes like that girl died in the river 10 years ago and nothing about her is the same as Aelin. On a side note, something that Celaena notices that I think is going to be really important to pay attention to is that there's actually an owl next to Mauve. And like, we see it. Have I been calling her Mauve again? I swear, I keep doing this. Mauve is a color, Maeve is the character. I'm so sorry. Her name is not Mauve. It is Maeve through and through. I keep doing this. Anytime I talk about her, I keep calling her Mauve, and it's really embarrassing at this point. But Maeve, okay? Maeve. Maeve always has an owl by her side. That's not super relevant right now, but it is gonna come up a couple times, so just like keep that mentally in the back burner. She does kind of have this passing thought, wondering if it's like an actual real owl or if it's a fae in their animal form, and their animal form is an owl. But then Maeve turns to Rowan, but she doesn't call him like Rowan. She calls him Prince Rowan. Honestly, I'm not gonna get too into this conversation because you can tell a lot of political baiting. Like Maeve is basically trying to get her to lash out or something. Like there's clearly some tension here. Like this isn't a sweet family reunion, but Celaena is determined to get answers about the word keys. So she's like holding her tongue, and you know my girl Celaena, that is not easy for her to do. Maeve, to put the icing on the cake of all the tension, she reveals that Celaena's mom, aka Maeve's sister, intentionally kept Aelin away from her. This is kind of where it occurs to Celaena. She's like, if my mother wanted to keep me away from you, it's likely for a very good reason. We're gonna wait to find out what that reason is, but Celaena's already like, you know what? I don't like where this is going. As Celaena's like contemplating all this, she starts feeling this burning, searing pain in her brain. Fun fact, Maeve can like rip into your mind. Like that's like her power, I guess. She can like read your mind, she can manipulate your mind, she can do a lot of different things. She can like pull information from your brain. So Celaena somehow, and this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine in these kinds of books, she's just able to like, no training whatsoever, just like put a wall up and block all of that. Like keep her from reading her brain, even though she was not trained how to do that to her knowledge. To her knowledge though, so you never know, but still, that's weird to me. But I guess there's something to say about the fact that Maeve is actually really surprised that Celaena is able to resist her mind manipulation, so there's something. So she says, you know what, I think I will answer your questions about the word keys. Only thing is that I need you to earn it. I need you to work for it. And I think that the best way to do that is for you to embrace who you truly are, which is Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, and you need to learn how to shift and how to use your magic, and basically you need to prove that you can be the queen that you were always meant to be, and then I will tell you the secret of the word keys. So she's supposed to go away for an undisclosed amount of time with Prince Rowan. Prince Rowan's gonna train her, and then once Rowan has decided that she's like good to go and she's ready, then he'll bring her back and Maeve will answer her questions. And this is especially risky because this isn't going to be like a 1 to 2 day thing. Like this is going to take weeks and potentially even months. But honestly, this is her only shot, so she agrees. So her and Rowan go off to Mistward. Mistward is a fortress where a bunch of like half fae, half human go to basically try to learn to embrace their fae selves. But on their way there, Rowan basically reveals that not only does he hate Celaena, he's not going to make this easy on her. Like that is very clear off the bat. He is hundreds of years old. He is one of Mauve's best warriors. Maeve, He's one of Maeve's best warriors, and he thinks her status as a notorious assassin is pathetic. He's like, okay, you're like a meek little human assassin, so what? And she starts to like give him some attitude back, and he literally turns around and in full force, supernatural fey power slugs her right in the face. And she's baiting him on purpose, and he knows it, so he's like, okay, fine, two can play this game. And they get like in a full-blown fight in which she is hysterically humbled. Because, honestly, compared to like a 500-year-old fae, like, she's nothing. And then, after they fight, and he humbles her, he says, you're on kitchen duties, see you tomorrow for training. And then he leaves. Chapter 9, Manon POV. So, post-scavenging of this village, her grandmother, or the Blackbeak matron, has summoned her to a place called Morath to guard her as she does some dealings with a duke. What duke do we know that just went to Morath? Parrington. So we also get a little bit of backstory here. Manon Blackbeak, she actually leads her own coven of witches called the 13, and as you guessed, there are 13 of them. And they're extremely well known, like this coven in the witch world basically, for being super brutal, super vicious, very precise, and warriors, because they've been fighting together for over 100 years. And they hunt down Crocians. Like, that's their thing. That's what they do. So we're officially at the meeting in Morath with the Duke, and there is a young woman and a young man currently with Duke Parrington. Something interesting off the bat, and I guess this is where you learn that witches do have like supernatural scent, kind of like how fae do, and she can smell that there's something severely off and not human about both Kaltane and Roland. So the Duke and the matron speak, and the matron comes back to Manon and she's like, gather your 13, we're all going to the mountains. Manon already doesn't like what this is looking like because she doesn't trust the Duke, she doesn't trust the scent on these humans, and then on top of that, her mother very clearly has some dealings with this Duke. She knows that all of them being summoned up north is gonna have something to do with this dude, but she cannot defy the matron. So they all summon up north, and it is revealed that Baba Yellowlegs has been murdered. And she was the matron of the Yellowlegs clan. To make things more interesting, the king of Aderlin is breeding wyverns. Not wyverns, wyverns. And he's going to give them to the witches in exchange for their brutal force in his conquest. Now listen, this is where things get kind of bonkers. Witches fly broomsticks in this story, but apparently, historically, hundreds of years ago, they used to ride wyverns, but wyverns, I think they went extinct or they became super rare. I don't know. I don't think they really go super into that or why, but basically wyverns have not been around and witches have not been able to ride wyvern. But the king has been breeding them and is offering them all their own wyverns if they fly in his battles as like his aerial army. Chapter 10, and this is in Kale's POV, and he is, you know, just like walking to check on his men because he's in charge of making sure that all the guards are where they need to be when they need to be there, and he realizes that 2 men are missing from their post. So when he goes to investigate, he finds out that Aiden Ashriver basically singled those 2 guys out and invited them to a party and basically forced them to go. Adian apparently rented out an entire tavern to throw this crazy epic party. Kale goes and he finds the 2 guards, and basically, let's just say they regret ever leaving their post in the first place. And Kale's like, I'm gonna have a word with Adian about basically stealing my men away from their post. But get this, he cannot find Adian at Adian's own party. Almost as if he's not even there. Chapter 11, this is going to be in Selena's POV. She's getting the day started off in kitchen duty, and this is where we meet 2 of the kitchen workers, Emrys and Luca. And we love Emrys and Luca. She actually introduces herself as Alentia, and this makes me want to bawl my eyes out. If you do not remember, Alentia is the name that Nehemia gave to Selena whenever her name was too heavy for her to carry. I feel like this also just kind of shows Selena's helplessness, because something that I don't think I mentioned earlier is like when she's picking a fight with Rowan, you can very clearly tell she wanted to get beat up. Like, she has quite literally no hope for herself herself. She is kind of in self-destruct mode right now, so I try to keep it nice, bright, and bubbly. I'm doing my best, but I also want to make sure that you fully understand the weight of what she's going through. The fact that she's resorting back to the name Alentia, it really just reflects, first of all, how much she's grieving Nehemia, but then on top of that, like, she can't even bear to be identified as herself right now. Like, she does not want to be herself. And Rowan actually walked into the kitchens when this happened, and he doesn't correct her. So he's like letting her go along with this like secret identity thing. So she starts her job in the kitchens, and she actually really does like Emerys and Luca. Like, she does click with them very quickly. They're just very sweet people, and they're like half fae, half human, and they're there in hopes to embrace their fae side and be able to tap into their power and basically be accepted in culture as fae. But let's just say Selena gets freaked out really fast when they start talking about how they've been there for literally years, and they still have not tapped into their magic. So she's like, I don't have years. But also she learns that they're all terrified of Rowan, and they feel bad for her that she's being trained by Rowan. So she does have a little bit of reassurance that she's being trained by the best. I think it's Emerys, not Luca, but Emerys actually does reveal that he has a mate. And this is the first time we're hearing about mates in this book. And mates is such a big deal in like every Sarah J Maas book. So if this is your first Sarah J Maas series or you're not familiar with the concept of mates, it's basically a bond that ties you closer even than marriage. So mates is quite literally like your soulmate. Like, you connect with one person, and they often like describe it as like having a string between the two of you that you can like tug on and that you can sense at all times, and that person is like your mate and you're bonded to them in every possible way. Chapter 12, we're gonna go back to Manon's POV. So they've all arrived to the northern Fang Mountains. All the clans, not just the Blackbeaks, not the Crocians, but the Blackbeaks, the Yellowlegs, and the Blue Bloods. So they're all gathered there, and they were all given the same offer to fight for the king, and they would get their very own wyverns. So the whole place smells weird, like Kaltain and Roland did, and it's really throwing Manon off. Like, she can't put a finger on what it is, but something about it's really bothering her. We're just learning to exist in the North Fang Mountains, also surrounded by like rival clans. You'll learn very quickly, these three clans, they don't like each other. Like, they're not like the Crocians that they're like literally trying to make them extinct, but they rival each other. They're always trying to outdo each other. It's a very competitive environment, very catty, if you will. This is also where we meet Asterin, which is Manon's second in the 13 coven. And Asterin's a bit of a free spirit, to say the least. You will find in multiple situations she's getting whipped and punished for basically speaking out or doing things she shouldn't for the sake of protecting Manon or the other people in her coven. And this has been stereotypical of her for years. She's actually Manon's cousin, so Manon knows her very well. But we learn off the bat at the beginning of this chapter that Asterin recently has become more of a loose cannon than a free spirit, and it's actually starting to make Manon worried about having her as a second in her coven. Because the second is, as you can imagine, like the second most important person in the coven. So anyways, they're all there. All three clans are together, and they're basically paying homage to matron Baba Yellowlegs. It's basically a funeral. And this is where we get a little bit more witch politics. You know how I said Manon's grandmother is the matron of the Blackbeaks? So she is actually the heir to the Blackbeaks. So basically, if her grandmother dies, she would become the Blackbeak matron. So she's like next in line to be the queen of the Blackbeaks. Who are the heirs to the other ones, you may ask? That's a great question. Because like, yeah, you need to know that there's a Yellowlegs and a Blue Blood matron, but like, they're not as important as the heirs, because we are mostly, whenever we're in witch chapters, we're mostly going through Manon's point of view, and because she's the heir, we like work with the other heirs often. So Petra is the other Blue Blood heir. And then there's Iskra. We hate her. We don't like her at all. She's the Yellowlegs heir. So we have Manon, Iskra, and Petra. So Iskra has a bone to pick with Manon. In my opinion, when does she not? But particularly right now, apparently. Because apparently Asterin, our lovely second and loose cannon, got in a fight with some other Yellowlegs in the North Fang Mountains. And Iskra is especially like demanding penance for this, and it's so annoying because it's really just because all the matrons, all three of them, they all prefer Manon. Like, even over the heirs of their own clans, like they all love Manon. Petra and Iskra, like they will do anything to try to bring Manon down. So Manon decides to get away from all the drama and she decides to go down to like where they're breeding all the wyverns and talk to some of the breeders, and basically learns that right now the wyverns are like fighting it out for dominance, and then once they've all kind of settled what their hierarchy is, then they're going to allow the witches to pick which ones they want. We also learn here that the weak ones are referred to as bait beasts, and they're going to be used to train the strong wyverns how to fight. That's kind of important. Remember that bait beasts, basically bottom of the totem pole in the wyvern world. This is also where Manon lays her eyes on Titus. Titus is the largest, most brutal, most intense of all of the wyverns, and it's in this moment that Manon decides, Titus is mine. I will get Titus. Nothing is gonna get in between me and having Titus as my mount. Chapter 13, Celaena's POV. She actually finds the kitchen job kind of therapeutic. And she's washing the dishes after breakfast one day when Rowan comes in and informs her that it's time for their first day of training. So he walks her out to a forest and basically just looks at her and he's like, okay, shift. Well, joke's on him because she never really learned how to do it as a child. She doesn't even know how. And he's like, no, you need to shift. And she's like, no, you don't understand. I can't shift and I won't shift and I don't like your tone. And basically it gets like this really sassy argument that they have, and he straight up like attacks her. And I guess he's trying to like bring out her fight, flight, and fright mode, hoping that it will force her to shift on instinct, because I guess for some people that works. But not for this girl, not for Celaena. That does nothing for her. And if anything, it just ticks her off more. And so he decides to take the verbal approach, and he decides to call her pathetic, spoiled, entitled, and then he calls her a coward. And if you remember Crown of Midnight, those were Nehemia's last words to Celaena, that she was a coward. And it's also become probably the heaviest trauma that she has carried from how things ended with Nehemia. And so this just makes her go ballistic. He doesn't really understand why, he doesn't know what happened, but he does realize that he crossed a line. Although he's not sure what that line is, he realized he crossed it. So he's like, okay, fine, I'll give you an out. So he walks her a couple miles to this really creepy cemetery. And I'll be totally honest, this scene is really hard for me when I read it to fully understand it. So it's a creepy magic cemetery that is guarded by giant iron doors that keep wights inside the cemetery. And for those of you who don't know, wights are basically like zombified magical beings. They're basically like fey zombies. Anyway, so he cuts her a deal, which we all know, and honestly, even Celaena, I'm pretty sure, is aware that it's a trap to make her realize, like, how weak she is. She can't say no to a bet, so she says, okay, bet, let's do it. But the deal is that if she can make it through the iron doors, walk through the creepy magical cemetery, and make it to the other side, he will tell Mauve that she's ready. And she knows he clearly would not put this in front of her if he thought she even had a chance of doing it. But she's got a point to prove, so she says yes. Chapter 14, it's dead of night, it's pitch black, and she decides she's gonna go for it. She's gonna make the walk through the creepy magical cemetery where there are zombified fae. So she starts to walk through, and all of the wights are looking at her, but none of them are pursuing her. And they're almost acting as if they're hesitant. And she's like, you know what? I don't really know what's going on here, but I'm gonna take advantage of it. So she's walking through as quickly as she possibly can. And then she realizes that they're all afraid of something. And it's not necessarily her. They're afraid of something behind her. She realizes that behind her there's a man that's not quite a man, but it's a thing. It's a person-ish, maybe. We don't really know. It's a being. So she decides to make a run for it, but then she starts having hallucinations of every traumatic thing she's ever experienced. And she's quite literally reliving it. So she's reliving her parents' murder, her kingdom being conquered, the brutal assassination of her best friend, everything she endured at the end of your slave camp. Like, she's quite literally reliving it all as if it's happening to her again. So she starts throwing up, literally pees herself, and then has like nothing short of the world's biggest panic attack, which no one's judging you for that. This honestly sounds horrifying. And then she realizes that the thing is behind her as it goes to like grab her from behind. So she snaps out of these extremely realistic and horrifying hallucinations and does some like crafty self-defense stuff. She somehow gets out of his grasp and she starts like sprinting towards Rowan. Somehow her survival instincts kick in and she actually gets to Rowan on the other side. So she did it, I guess. Anyways, so this is what the book says. She was screaming or sobbing or not making any sound at all. Then she felt a shift and a surge. A a well opening beneath her stomach and filling with burning, relentless fire. Agony cleaved her in a pulse, her vision jumping between crystal clarity and the muted eyesight of mortals, her teeth aching as the fangs punched out and retracted, ebb and flow, mortal, immortal, shifting as fast as a hummingbird's flapping wings. With each shift, this well deepened. That's important to know. Well, there's a well, it's deepening. Remember that. That wildfire rising and falling and reaching up, up, up. She really did scream then because her throat burned, or maybe that was just the magic coming out as she unleashed it. And then she literally passes out. So not only did Homegirl finally shift, but she literally shifted back and forth between her fae form and her human form like 100 different times. Basically, her magic is like losing control and doing a bunch of crazy junk. And there's a bunch of allusions to fire there. So this is also where you are supposed to pick up the fact that her power is wildfire. So she wakes up hours later at Rowan's feet, where he informs her that she had a magical tantrum. Listen, she just went through probably the most traumatic thing of her life, and you just told her she had a tantrum. Sir. And then he says that the thing that like chased her and gave her hallucinations should not have been there, and that there's actually been skinwalkers in the area. We'll learn a little bit more about what those are, and they are as horrifying as they sound, but he had no clue what that thing was that attacked her. So he tries to interrogate her about what happened, but she's like, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you because you just told me I had a magical tantrum, and she doesn't want to relive all that. So he decides to escort her back to Mistward and call it a night. Chapter 15, Cale's point of view. He's in his bedrooms, and his father just like made his way in there somehow, I guess, and is just like harassing him, which like I get why he's upset, but at the same time, we don't like Daddy Westfall. We never do like him. There's never a reason to like him. So anything he does is just extremely annoying. Like, he breathes and he's annoying. But realistically, he found out that Cale hasn't even told the king yet that he's leaving, and he doesn't have a replacement yet. You name it, like, he hasn't done it. So his dad's like, are you an oath breaker? Are you breaking your oath? He's also upset that he hasn't even begun packing his things, because he's in his room and he's like, oh, all your stuff is still nice and moved in. So when were you planning on moving back home, like you promised? Cale's excuse is that he hasn't found a worthy replacement yet, but is definitely just an excuse. Because he hasn't really left because of Adian. Something is really messing with his head when it comes to Adian. Also, with what Aelin told him about the word keys, he really wants to make sure that he does everything he can before he leaves. And then the third thing is that this rebel group that Archer and Nehemia were leading, we don't really know what's come of it. Just because the two people who were leading it died doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist anymore. On top of that, Nehemia wanted to destroy the word keys, whereas Archer wanted to use them. So clearly, even within this rebel movement, it's kind of like we don't really know what's going to become of it, because even the two leaders disagreed on what their objective was. Also, I legitimately could not tell you why this happens or why he knows this, but for some reason, and I'm really racking my brain right now and I cannot remember for the life of me, but Cale somehow hears a rumor that the rebels, intentions unknown, but these rebels have found a way to release magic. Not only does he need to figure out how in the world they plan to do that, but he also really wants to know, because he wants to know what the outcome would be for Dorian if magic was released. So he tells his dad, yeah, give me 3 months. I'll be there in 3 months, which, if you ask me, like, any one of those tasks could not be accomplished in 3 months. So the fact that he thinks he's going to accomplish all 3 in 3 months is kind of hysterical. And then what's even crazier is that his dad somehow talks him down to 2 months. He'll give him 2 months and Cale owes him a favor, which, if you ask me, that's a really dumb bargain, so I don't know why Cale accepts it. Sorsha's POV. She, the healer, remember the cute little healer, right? She's called to Dorian's rooms by name, and supposedly he has some cuts on his hand and his lip from like sparring, and then he starts like asking her about herself, and this is like not standard. This is not normal. Usually they come in, they service them, whatever they need, and then they leave. So he he's asking her where she's from, and she's actually very hesitant to say because Fenharrow is one of those cities that's like very controversial topic politically, because quite literally almost everyone there was killed because most of the people who had magic, I guess, were like collectively in Fenharrow. So when magic was banned and people were getting killed for it, the people in Fenharrow took a really hard hit. But it's a small village, or it was a small village in the south, but it just no longer exists because it was completely just demolished. This is also where we find out that she's had a crush on him for years. Like, this is an internal thing, and I think we like definitely picked up on this earlier, but it's definitely confirmed right here. He starts asking her more questions about her family, like if they survived the attacks on Fenharrow, and she says no, and things get awkward and weird, so she ends up just like leaving when she's done healing him. And then I love this part. The following day, she didn't expect the messenger who arrived after breakfast asking for the name of her village in Fenharrow. And when she hesitated, he said that the crown prince wanted to know. He wanted to know so he could have it added to his personal map of the continent. Chapter 16, Manon's point of view. Tension is at an all-time high with the witches right now because they want to settle who has what wyverns, because they're being bred and they're being trained, and all of the witches are now kind of like stalking them out, and they've already like low-key mentally claimed them, but they haven't actually. There's going to be like a claiming ritual and everything. They're all like super on edge about who's going to get what wyverns. In case you missed it, the witches in the Throne of Glass world, they drink human blood. They're basically like vampire witch hybrids. Honestly, sometimes I think Throne of Glass witches are more like vampires than actual witches, but it's just like a funny little tidbit because there's a lot of the king's men and like guards who are all in the Northfang Mountains. They're all like terrified of them, and there's like strict rules by the king, and they're not allowed to drink the blood of any of the king's men, which if you ask me, buzzkill, but hey, like I get it. So anyways, it's flying time, and the witches are going to be riding wyverns for the first time in over 100 years, and it's a very exciting and crazy thing, but it's not like their wyverns, so they haven't claimed them yet. This isn't like the claiming ritual. They're like training wyverns. They're basically the ones that are super duper trained. They're not training to fight in battle, so they're not going to be trying to like fight it out with each other. They're going to be very complacent and very workable for the witches to like practice flying and practice formations and stuff like that. For their flying training today, the 13 have to go over something called the drop. And I will tell you right now, I'm on my like third or fourth time rereading these books, and only now has the drop actually made sense to me. I don't know what I was imagining in my head before, but apparently it's like a cave mouth, but it's horizontal to the ground. So they're like flying over a giant hole in the mountain. Okay, yeah, maybe it still doesn't really make sense to me. But anyways, there's this giant gap, right? A drop, if you will, that they're going to be flying over. And of course, Manon and her coven. Why do I keep calling her Manon? I've always been a hardcore Manon person, but I keep calling her Manon. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm not like anti any sort of pronunciation. I just think it's very weird because I've always been a big Manon chick. Manon and her 13 fly over the drop. They absolutely crush it. They were the first ones to do it. They're setting the example. The matrons are happy. Everyone's happy. Except for Iskra and Petra, who continue to feel threatened by Manon and her success. So later that day, Manon's grandmother, aka the Blackbeak matron, summons her, tells her she's proud of her. Mind you, this is a really intense woman. So for her to be like, I'm so proud of you, like that's rare, that's weird, that's suspicious. And then tells her that she and her coven are being promoted to wing leader, which is basically they're going to be leading the Blackbeaks in battle. And basically said there's gonna be an Iron Teeth queen and she wants it to be Manon. I think that's very interesting because based off what we know about the matron, I would assume that she would want to be the one sitting on the throne and being the queen in the end. But she says like she wants it to be Manon. Like she wants Manon to be the queen of all the Iron Teeth witches once this is all said and done. Chapter 17, Celaena's POV. If Celaena did not already feel horrible enough, she wakes up feeling even more horrible. She basically goes down to her kitchen duties the next morning, and when she walks into the kitchen, Luca and Emerys are like, horrified because she looks like she's been through it, frankly. Then later that day, Prince Rowan comes and picks her up for their training, and he has one command and one command only. He tells her, okay, shift, and as always, she refuses to do it. And at this point, I really do think it's not even her refusing. Like, she legit just doesn't know how to do it, but her pride won't let her admit that she can't, so she's just pretending like it's a choice. She does actually, like, later in the day give it a couple tries, but like nothing's happening. After training, she goes back to the kitchen. She tries to shovel down like as much food as possible, and it's like much later in the day. Like, they literally, I can't even imagine, like, from breakfast to late in the evening. Like, we're talking an 18+ hour day where Rowan is just staring at her being like, shift. Like, I would actually lose my mind, but she did not shift all of that, and she literally, I guess they just stood there in the woods. But she gets to the kitchen, and Emerys and Luca and a couple other people, they're like telling stories about the Fae, and kind of like, think like campfire stories, but about their heritage and about their mythology. And she basically just hides in the back and she eats as much as she can, and she just like soaks in all of these stories. And then she looks out a window and she sees a hawk, and she realizes that she has seen that specific hawk a couple times, including when she was rotting away on the rooftops in Wendelin. So it has occurred to her that Rowan's animal form is this hawk that he has been turning into, and he's been watching her from. And also, he is in his hawk form listening to these campfire stories. Chapter 18 is a long one, and it's got 3 different POVs. So let's start strong with Dorian's POV. Dorian is basically making it like his daily mission to find an excuse to go down to the infirmary to see Sorcha, and I am here for it. I think it's adorable. And it's one of those things where, like, he knows that she likes him, and she's kind of picking up that he likes her, but at the same time, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in the Throne of Glass book, he had a reputation for basically being a heartbreaker and like making his way around the court. She thinks he might still be that way, and she's like, I don't know if you actually like me, or if you're just kind of bored. But she's actually getting to this point now where she's like, oh, he might actually like me. So oddly enough, one day where he's down there in the infirmary, she starts asking him about Selena. Basically, she's like, hey, like, I still haven't told anyone about that one night, and I don't plan to, but I'm just like curious, like, what is going on? Like, are you guys okay? Like, what? Like, I rightly so. As a residential nosy person, I'm surprised it took her this long to ask, so I think it's just totally reasonable. But she asks, and he decides that he trusts her, and he actually tells her like everything that he witnessed that night, like everything that led up to them coming down to the infirmary. As he's talking about this, he's getting very emotional, he's getting really riled up. And what did we learn from the book Crown of Midnight? Dorian, who has no idea what his magic is or how to control it, he accidentally releases usually very chaotic forms of magic when his emotions are heightened. So he's talking about this, he's getting really anxious, and then all of a sudden his magic just like erupts everywhere. We're gonna jump to Sorcha's POV because Dorian just like exploded magic. She's such a queen. Like, it was in this moment that I knew I loved her. She literally turns to him and she's like, I'm not gonna tell anyone. And then she like turns over a table that had a bunch of stuff on it, and everything spills, and it causes this huge commotion. And Mithy, remember, she's the like head healer of the castle, she like bursts into the room, and Sorcha takes the full blame. She was like, oh my word, I'm so klutzy, like I knocked over the table, because like his burst of magic, like it knocked a bunch of stuff over, and it also like made some noise. So she like tipped the table so that when Amethy came in, it would like seem like that's definitely what happened, is that the table they were next to like fell over, and that's why everything's exploded and all over the place. Honestly, just like genius on the spot thinking on Sorcha's end. And there's basically like, there's herbs and medicines and potions, and like everything is just everywhere. And I think the funniest part is that Amethy is literally just like most concerned that Prince Dorian witnessed this, because she thinks this is just Sorcha being super incompetent, and so she scolds Sorcha for being so careless, let alone in front of the prince, and she's apologizing to the prince over and over and over again. I'm so sorry for Sorcha being so unprofessional. It's like this whole thing. She basically asked Dorian to leave, and she's like, we'll clean this up right away. I'm so sorry. If you ever need anything, like, we'll come to your rooms. Like, there's no reason why you should feel the need to have to come down here. And you know, she's catering to the prince as like her job. And basically she's like, Sorcha, you need to clean this up and then Amethy leaves. So as Saoirse's cleaning everything up, she is like, the prince has magic. Like, it's occurred to her, like in the moment, obviously, like she knew something had happened, but she hadn't really processed it. And then he leaves and she's like, his eyes glowed, magic erupted, it came from Prince Dorian. So she knows like his most dangerous secret. Chaol's POV. He decided to go to one of Aedian's parties tonight, and he pretends to get like crazy drunk and he's just enjoying time with some of his guards that are off duty that night. And he pays close attention to Aedian, and he notices when Aedian sneaks out, and so Chaol decides to follow him. Turns out Aedian was meeting someone and he had his hood up. Aedian and the hooded figure go into this building, and Chaol is like walking up to like try to go scout out the situation because he realizes that this is the building that Celaena told him that the rebels were meeting up at. In pure Chaol fashion, I'm honestly so surprised he's captain of the guard considering how many times this has happened, but someone sneaks up on him and attacks him. Gives him the good old chloroform treatment. Like, the amount of times that Chaol gets snuck up on in the series is honestly so comedic. And I hate to leave you on a cliffhanger, but honestly, the next chapter is where everything just picks up like crazy. So I'm actually going to stop here, and then we are going to continue from chapter 19 for part 2 this upcoming Friday. So I will see you then.